Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Before we give you a little overview of our guest of the week this week, we want to give another shout out to our brand partner at fightsatw.com, where you can get your professional wrestling news and your sport of boxing news, and maybe a little bit of a sprinkle of MMA news in there as well. Fightsatw.com, our brand partner here at the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Go check them out. Our guest this week, he's been on the podcast multiple times in the past. I believe this might be his fourth or fifth go around here on the show. He's a police homicide detective for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles, California. And he's been a police officer for, I believe, over 30 years. I believe I'm right. Maybe closer to 40, I believe. Maybe at least over 30 for sure. He's been on the U.S. show Dateline for some murder cases and all that. He's currently, I think, leading a team within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department of missing persons. So I think he's the supervising detective for that team right now in Los Angeles. So he does some pretty crazy stuff. He does some very important work, which isn't even his. I guess that's his day job, if you want to say, but he's also a professional cutman. And if you've watched any fight in the last several years, there's a 99% chance, probably even almost 100, that you've seen him in the corner, because he's been with some of the biggest stars and some of the biggest boxers in the world. Manny Pacquiao. He has a long relationship with Julian J. Rock Williams. He's on with Team Robert Garcia, Vergil Ortiz. He's been with a lot of fighters and continues to be with a lot of fighters in the corner as being their cut man. Our guest of the week is Mike Rodriguez.
And now it's time for the last round interview of the week.
The crime-fighting cut man, Mike Rodriguez, returns to the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Welcome back to the show, Mike. Thank you again.
Hey, thanks for having me. I think this is my fourth go around with you guys over the last 5 years. So it's always a good time.
We appreciate it, man. We definitely appreciate it. So, I want to start with probably the most significant news of the year so far here in 2025, and probably the most significant news of maybe the last decade or more. Like everybody's been talking about the new boxing league that's been announced between TKO and Saudi Arabia, or TKO is supposed to head it, Dana White and all that. Just because of your involvement with boxing and so many fighters and so many trainers, and you're in it, man. Like, who better to ask? Like, well, what was your reaction to hearing the rumbles about it and then officially hearing the announcement?
Yeah, I kind of heard that something was in the works. Dana White doesn't. He's not a guy that talks idly. You've seen what he's done with the UFC, whether you're a fan of MMA or not. Aside from some of the lawsuits and the fighters complaining about pay and whatnot, but when you look at the structure of the best fighters fighting each other, which I'm a big fan of. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and guys fought each other, and now it's like, because of social media, which could be a blessing, and it could also be the devil in some ways. A lot of the fighting's done on the internet, and I think this TKO league, I don't know, all the particulars, but I think in theory, it has a chance to be a very substantial thing. I think it's going to take a while. I don't know how things are going to line up with promoters and sanctioning bodies. I think sometimes different promotions, different sanctioning bodies, the fighters, those things can sometimes not all line up in a perfect storm. So we get the best fights. Um, I'm a big fan of anything that's better for the sport. I've been involved in this pretty much my whole life, so I'm a fan of that. It just has to see how things shake out, how receptive people are going to be, and how interested they are in being part of the solution. I'm not saying that's the only solution, but being a part of a solution, whatever the solution is, to make the sport better. Because when I grew up, we were on network television. When I say we, it's boxing as a whole. We were on network television, and people knew who champions were. And now it's, with an alphabet soup of organizations and lots of weight classes and stuff. It has gotten diluted. I can be the first to tell you that, because sometimes I may not even be the biggest fan anymore, just because of all those things. So, but I do like watching compelling fights. And I think that's going to be the thing that I'm going to look forward to the most is if those fights are going to be compelling on a consistent basis.
So you kind of touched on, like the alphabet soup, and, there's a ton of weight classes now and all that. One thing that I believe Dana White has said, not just after the announcement, but in the past, is that he wants to trim down the number of weight classes. What do you think about that? Are you on board with that? Do you support something like that?
First and foremost, I'm always about fighter safety. That's the first and foremost. I lost a fighter in the ring, Patrick Day, a few years ago when he fought Charles Conwell. So that always hits kind of close home to me. I've seen fighters at the end of their road that have taken, substantial punishment that affects them later in life. But I mean, I think at the smaller weight divisions, I mean, you got, there's a lot of weight divisions before you actually get up to 126 pounds. And I have to see how that shakes out. I don't necessarily know if we need a junior lightweight division between 126 and 135. I still want to see the junior welterweight division, just because it's so steeped in history, going back to fighters like Wilfred Benitez, who was the youngest world champion at 17. I mean, imagine a legitimate world champion, at 17. So I just think the smaller guys are always the ones to suffer the most when it comes to those things, because people see the smaller fighters, and just historically, I hate to say it, but they've been less relevant. Not that they've been less talented, not that they've been less accomplished, but for some reason the superstar weight classes of lightweight and welterweight, and obviously heavyweight, have always carried the sport. So but I mean, do we have too many weight classes? Yeah, probably. I think so, but it's just a matter of doing it in a fair, equitable manner that makes it better for boxing. If you got a guy fighting at 122, but he should be fighting at 126, and he's just making weight, that means he's not fighting the best at 126. So that would be the reason I would want to see those kind of things. I'm not sure what your guys' opinion of that is.
How would you measure, I guess, a majority of a success for this league? Let's just say a decade from now. Like, how would you measure? Because there's going to be criticisms. There's going to be problems, from people who say, whether it's fighter pay, or, monopolies or all that. There's going to be criticism, just like anything in life, right? But a decade from now, when it's up and going, a decade or 20 years from now, how would you, looking back on those 10 or 20 years, would you measure a successful launch?
That it's better for boxing, that everybody's paid fairly, that fighter safety is of the utmost, that the fans are happy, because when the fans are happy, that brings more people to arenas, that brings more interest, it means more viewership. Obviously now we're not really on TV anymore, so to speak. We're really on streaming devices, which has been a big adjustment even for myself. I think, you guys could turn on HBO, ESPN, and Showtime, up until a couple of years ago, and that's where the fights were at. And now, you got to go to different streaming devices, and I think it gets a little more confusing, to the average fan. I like my parents, they like to watch. My dad likes to watch the fights, but when I tell him, he's like, "What channel is it on?" I said, "Well, it's not really on a channel." but I'll get you all these things. And then he gets, frustrated, because he's in his 70s and I'm in my late 50s now. So I get frustrated with things, but it's just a matter of, keeping up with the times. And in 10 years, I remember when PBC started, and believe it or not, and this is something there's certain things in my boxing career, as a cutman, that I take pride in. One is that, I was there during the Boxino champions, and I had 3 Boxino champions. And it didn't seem like a big deal in the grand scheme of boxing, but Artie Palulu, Banner Promotions, put on that Boxino, and it was pretty good. Once every couple of years, and I had a couple of champions. But I worked the very first televised PBC fight, and I don't know if you remember who it was, but it was John Molina against Adrian Broner, and then Keith Thurman, Robert main event. Those were the 2 fights that were shown, but I worked the very first one. And
was it CBS?
No, it was actually. That particular fight was actually, I want to say NBC. But remember, one weekend NBC, the next weekend they were doing CBS. So
right.
it was all, and then it was on Fox. So it was going to different platforms. Change because of selfish reasons and little empires that people create. They're going to feel like those are in jeopardy, and they might be, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I'm not saying change is always good, but you have to change with the times. You have to change with the technology. You have to try to maximize promoters. Streaming devices now, not even going to say networks, have to maximize their profit. And everything's always about the bottom line. Anything we do in life is about the bottom line, especially when you're running a business. And that's just the way I have to look at it. Just like what I do. I recently went to Saudi Arabia, and I worked with Virgil Ortiz, and it was great. And he was in a great fight with Modernov, and that was a great card. It was first rate. And there was a manager of a world champion there, and I remember they wanted me to work with him additionally to Virgil. And it was like, how much do you charge? And I was like, well, what I charge a fighter that makes 10 grand, 100 grand, 500 grand, and $1 million is different. So I go, I really can't give you that until I know what he's making. And they didn't want to divulge that to me, like they don't publish that to a week later. And I just said, so I really can't tell you what I'm going to charge. I kind of figured I knew what he was kind of making, but I said, why don't we do this? Why don't you tell me what you think is a fair price? And I always include the word fair in there, and they couldn't do that. So we couldn't come to an agreement, but I wasn't going to sell myself short. I'm not trying to overcharge anybody. I'm not trying to get rich. I'm just trying to be fair. And as it turned out, it was probably better that I didn't work with the fighter. I was just happy working with Virgil, and I liked working with him and his dad and Robert Garcia and Hector Beltran and, the whole team at Golden Boy. So that's it's one of those things. Everything always comes down sometimes, excuse me, to the bottom line. And sometimes the business does, just like everything else, the business does get in the way.
When did you feel, staying on that subject about, that in Saudi Arabia, you couldn't come to an agreement with that fighter and his team? Looking back on your career as a cutman, when did you start doing that, where you were comfortable enough and confident enough to tell a fighter and his team, like, well, what is he making? That then I can give you a fair price.
Conversation, and sometimes people have trouble doing that, but I've also did it the other way, where I just shortchanged myself. Not, like I said, I'm not trying to rob a bank here. I want my work to be appreciated. I just want to be fairly compensated. Okay. And I think as your championship pedigree grows and your reputation grows, you're able to be a little bit more selective and judicious on who you work with. And I'm at that point in my life where I want to work with good people. And I'm really I like team building, and I like being involved with good championship caliber teams. Nobody's ever going to remember how much money I made, working the fights. What they're going to remember is my championship pedigree, and maybe how many world champions I worked with. I worked with 28 world champions. And to me, it's not about the money. It's about that, but it is still work, and everybody's getting paid. It's not, we're not volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club. And sometimes I have to remind managers of that, like, well, you're making more. Well, is everybody else taking a pay cut? I just have those conversations, and they're not really antagonistic in nature, but it just lets them know too that, You know, it's not just for me. I want other cutmen to be fairly compensated, and I see a lot of people getting taken advantage of because maybe they don't have the pedigree like a Stitch Duran or a Carlos Vargas, you know, or Danny Milano or Mike Basil or myself or Russ Amber, you know, that work with a lot of the champions out there. But you also have to set a standard that there's an old saying, good work ain't cheap and cheap work ain't good.
Do you remember looking back on who essentially was the first fighter that you aligned with as a cutman who really you felt really like fairly compensated you, and then that began like your trajectory?
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. I've been working with Julian Williams and Stephen the Breadman Edwards for 15 years, and at that time, 15 years ago, I was working, wasn't necessarily a main event guy or considered, you know, a guy that was at the top, at the upper echelon of the food chain. And we kind of just grew together, and Julian ended up being a unified world champion. It's kind of like when you go to a nightclub and you're with your boys and you're dancing with the ugly chicks, and none of the good looking girls are looking at you. But when you get that one good looking girl, the other girls are going to start looking at you. And for me, Julian was that, you know, and he took a tough loss a couple of weeks ago at Barclays to the Cuban trained by Ronnie Shields. And it's just, we've been through the whole evolution. Not speaking for Julian, if that's going to be his last fight. He's 34 now. He was a unified world champion prior. You know, he's had, you know, almost close to 35 pro fights. Father Time is very unforgiving. Father Time is undefeated unless you were like Bernard Hopkins, you know. And it's just been an incredible journey because I've seen us all grow. We grew together, and we, you know, kind of reached the top of our profession. Stephen Edwards as a trainer, Julian as a fighter, and myself as a cut man. And I think I'm not so much a destination person. It's the journey that I remember the most, and all the fights. And when I first started working with him here in California with the Gary Shaw, used to promote fights at the Chumash Casino, and he wasn't making any money. And, you know, they were short on rooms and food vouchers and stuff, all the way to him fighting, you know, beating Jared Hurd for the unified world title right afterwards, which was my first time on your guys' show, you know, and headlining on Fox, and, you know, and making a good amount of money that he's now been able to set himself up for the rest of his life, that, you know, I don't think he even needs to fight anymore. And that's a success story from a Philly street kid that didn't grow up in the best of circumstances, you know, and he's made something of himself, and he's a father now of, you know, of two daughters and a son. And I always talk to Stephen Edwards about this. You know, when I met him, Stephen Edwards didn't even have any kids, and now his daughter's getting ready to go into high school. So that's the journey, man. That's the journey. And my son started working cuts several years after that, and he even got to be in the corner with Julian during one of our world title fights. And now my son has got his own stable of fighters, and he's the cut man for Montes Stanionis, you know, fighting Boots Ennis next month in Atlantic City.
How was your experience in Saudi Arabia with Virgil? Was that your first time over there?
Yeah, man, it was crazy because the day before I checked my itinerary, I realized that nobody had actually booked my flight.
Oh, so man.
I had to get a hold of the powers to be to said, I need my flight booked. So when they booked my flight, they changed airlines. I had a 1 hour layover from LAX to Frankfurt, from Frankfurt to get on the plane to Saudi. And we sat on the tarmac. Mike Basil was flying in the same day because he was working with somebody, and he was flying in from San Francisco, and our planes were landing similar, and we were going to be flying to Saudi from Frankfurt together. Well, we both had short layovers, and we both land, and he says, hey, the gate we're going to is like 2 miles away in Frankfurt. We got to take like 2 buses. It's crazy. Well, we sat on the tarmac because there was no gate. Not on the tarmac, on the runway, because there was no gate. And now my plane's literally leaving in 35 minutes. I get off and I have to run a half a mile to get to a bus. And then I got to run like 20 gates because no matter what airport I go to, the gate I go to is always the last one to get on another bus. But guess what? I got on the plane. I'm breathing. I'm sweating. I mean, I've already been on a 13-hour flight. And when before I landed, I got on the app and it says my luggage didn't make it with me, which was going to be a tough turn anyway, because they had like 20 minutes by the time they unloaded that plane. I didn't have my luggage till the day before the fight. I didn't have my
Oh.
cut. I didn't have anything, and I was just totally stressed. And I didn't sleep, and it was very stressful. Thank God I knew like Russ Amber and Mike Basil were there. And in a worst case scenario, I could borrow their stuff, but I wanted my stuff, and I finally ended up going to the airport in Riyadh, and went to like 3 different terminals to go to some baggage area underneath the parking structure to go look for all these thousands of lost, misfit bags, to go look for my bag. And I found it. I said, that's my bag. And they gave it to me. And I remember taking an Uber back to the hotel. And then I had to come back. And then we went to the ceremonial weigh-ins, but I didn't care at that point. I had my stuff, and I was like, you know what? I'm good to go now. Let's rock and roll. But it's a very modern city. Everybody speaks English. You obviously got to be on your P's and Q's, because they don't allow a lot of horse shit over there, which is fine with me because I'm not really a drinker or a partier. Only thing I ever want is just to grab a good meal, man. That's really all I ever want. Where's the best place we can grab a good steak dinner? But it was a great experience. It's a rough trip, man, from LA, because it's 12, 13 hours to Frankfurt. You got to lay over, and then you got another 6-hour flight to Riyadh. And then you got to clear customs and get your baggage. So it's a whole 24 hours by the time you are done, man. It's like a whole 24-hour ordeal. But I love working with Virgil. As you can see, he takes tough fights, and he's always in great fights, and we got a good team, and hopefully, we can keep it going, for years to come.
Did you not like, were you not just aware that you had no flight booked, or was it, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't a last minute thing, right?
My itinerary in the day before, when I decided I was going to just, I was going to go on Qatar Airlines, and I was just going to download their app and just see when I could check in 24 hours before. There's no itinerary for you. And then to realize that nobody had booked my flight, and then everything had to rebook. So I literally didn't have my booked itinerary for till about 16 hours before I actually left. So that's stressful in itself, because we're not going to San Antonio, we're not going to Vegas, to Phoenix, or you're going to Saudi Arabia, man. That's like a whole different animal. You know what I mean? But it's I've had some adventures traveling, man. It's literally like planes, trains, and automobiles. I've definitely had some adventures traveling. So, it's just the price of doing business sometimes. And you can choose not to take those chances and not do it. But, there's always somebody that's willing to take your spot. So I don't want anybody to take my spot.
Did you find a good steak dinner out there?
The restaurant we were at, man, I had lamb chops every night. The lamb chops were so good over there, man, that I ended up having lamb chops. Me and Virgil's doctor, Juan Bautista, Dr. B, were at the same hotel, which was literally next door to the host hotel, which was nice because it was less crowded. We had lamb chops every night. So they had breakfast every morning where they make you omelets and stuff. But, I mean, the food is very Americanized over there. And it was good. Once you're there, man, you're good. You're good, but it's a long haul, man. It's definitely a long haul.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I've heard. Has there ever been a moment in, whether it's in your police career or your career as a cutman, when your instincts have kicked in terms of what you learned in either career? Like if you're working in police work, is there something that, like an instinct that kicked in that you learned as a cutman, or vice versa?
I think it more happens that my instincts from the military and as a detective kick in more for boxing. Just because it's about being prepared. I always tell people, I hope for the best, but I always plan and expect the worst. That way I'm always ready, and there's nothing that's too shocking for me. Because of what I've done as a cop for 38 years, I could have retired 5 years ago. Every time I come on a show, I keep telling everybody I could have retired a year ago, 2 years ago. Now it's up to 5 years ago. That I love what I do. I love doing things at a high level, but everything slows down for me because of the other stressful things that I've done in my life, whether it be the military, being a fighter before, as a homicide detective, working the gang units. that being in that corner, I'm able to offer my fighter a sense of calm and reassurance that I'm not going to be the one panicking, that everything's going to slow down for me. And I've had success doing that. And I think that's why when I look at my son and what he does, because he was a really good athlete, everything slows down for him as well. And that's just the best compliment that I can give another cut man, is that they're very calm. You can't control what happens during the round. But when your fighter stands up, you got to make sure that he looks like he's ready to go. So the ringside doctors and the referees, and the fighter himself, they know that they're gonna be okay. And I think that just comes from repetition. It comes from doing things the same way at a high level all of the time. And so that when something bad, when I say bad happens, I mean there's a trauma to the face, that you're ready, because you got less than a minute, that you're ready to perform. And I think that's one of the things that I love about being a cut man, because I wasn't a cut man before, I was a trainer, is that I actually get to do something physical during that fight that actually affects the fight. And thankfully, I'm going to knock on wood, you're going to hear it, because I'm superstitious, that it's been a positive thing and not a negative thing.
I think we've asked you this before, but what, up until this point, what moment in any fight that you've worked as a cut man do you feel that, even though it's a team effort, there's a trainer, there's yourself, you guys have multiple teams there, but what moment do you feel that your job was really significant to the fight, where it helped that fighter either win the fight or continue the fight? Is there something that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, there's a few fights of Francisco Vargas, and I think we have talked about this when he fought Orlando Salido at StubHub. And I remember Jim Lampley gave me a compliment that I've talked to Jim about that since. Sergey Lipinets on his title run, my son and I both double teamed the cuts and got him to a world title. Sean Porter, in a portion of his career with 2 fights with Julio Diaz, when he won the title from Devin Alexander, and his fight that he lost his title to Kell Brook, he was a bloody mess. And I think being able to get him through those fights, and fights like with Francisco, and fights like with Sergey Lipinets, that you become battle tested. You become battle tested. Some of the best work, I always tell people, that I've ever done is nobody even noticed, and it had to do with swelling, because I didn't let the swelling become an issue, and nobody will even notice that. But you take that inner satisfaction sometime, that you did a good job. And the people that know boxing, the trainers and other cut men and the fighters and the managers and, some journalists, they understand and respect that. And the most thing that I ever want is I always want the respect of my team and my peers. And when you have that, there is a sense of satisfaction.
Would you say remaining calm or increasing your level of calmness over the years since you started would be the most significant, I guess, approach that you've instituted?
Well, but see, the calmness also comes from that you've been there before, and the repetition, and knowing the tools of your trade and how they work in different situations. Because every fighter's different. Fighters breathe different. Not every fighter is the most calm in the corner on his own. You have different teams that are a little bit more excitable. You got fighters that move around. There's just a million things that can go on. And in boxing, being the theater of the unexpected, whatever can go wrong will definitely go wrong. But I just think, I've worked thousands of rounds. I've worked, over 1,000 fights, and damn near every major city in this world, and with I've had 28 world champions, and which I take extreme pride in, and I think just it's experience. You can't replace experience, and I've said this before, and I tell a lot of young cut men, and when you say young, these are grown men. You're not like talking to teenagers. You're talking to guys that are in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Let your work speak for itself. Let your work speak for itself. Don't be a cartoon character, man. Don't have a funny hat or a vest or a cute nickname, or you have some kind of stick that, some kind of, I don't know, that people know you by that rather than your work. I'm kind of a no frills, no nonsense, very direct in my approach guy. I'm just kind of like that in my life in general. I don't like a lot of fluff and flair. And I think that's worked best for me.
I know your job as a cutman is always to, your work speaks for itself. The trainer's the one doing the communicating with the fighter, right, like directly in front of him, and you're right there just to the side, but doing what you need to do. Has there ever been a moment where either the trainer kind of asked you to kind of chime in for the fighter because maybe the fighter was like feeling some type of way?
Oh, absolutely. I do have, because like I said, I come from a fighting and training background. With Julian Williams, Stephen Edwards is the one, saying the most, but I've been with them long enough and they respect my opinion in my eyes that there are times where I'll say certain things. And I do that with other teams. I'm never going to dominate, the trainer, but I do have that luxury with some teams, because I've been around them and they trust my eyes and my expertise and my word. So yeah, but like I said, I'm not the trainer. Sometimes, a lot of the times, I won't even tell the fighter. I'll tell the trainer something that I see, and then they can, as they filter through while the rounds going on, they have that choice whether to use that or not.
Has a fighter ever asked you directly while they're in the corner during the middle rounds, like a question like, Mike, well, what do you think?
Yeah, Julian Williams does it all the time, man. J-Rock would always ask if we won the round, and we'd have to tell him to be quiet. Every fight, Julian would say, "Hey, look, I'm not going to talk in the corner." And we're like, "Yeah, you are." So just, it was just kind of like a running joke that me and him and the Breadman have. But yeah, fighters have. And then sometimes, I'll work with teams where there's younger trainers where they value my, my expertise, and those younger trainers that are still making their way with younger fighters. They definitely embrace me doing that, and I think that just comes from being respected and your opinion valued.
So you have War Tape, the product War Tape. Yes. Is there anything since you've put that out there that you've been thinking about the next product or the next technique that you'd like to bring into the sport?
Absolutely. I'm partnered up with two brothers, the Vittori brothers. We're on Amazon now. I don't want to jinx it, but we're going to be coming out with a K-Tape kinesiology tape that Amazon actually came to us and says, "Hey, we guys have a big enough name now. We have a partnership with the WBC. We're going to be a huge part of some stuff that goes on in Saudi Arabia." I just had a Zoom meeting this morning with Mauricio Suleiman from the WBC. We already have that. We already have a co-brand with that green tape that you see. And people will come up to me and go, "Hey, that WBC tape's better than War Tape." And then I said, "Did you look closely on the thing that it says WBC and War Tape? It's a co-brand that we do, that we make for them." So, you know how people are, man. They can win the lottery and they get mad because they'd have to go drive and pick up the check, So the kinesiology tape will be something that's not, obviously boxing will be a small part of that. We are actually selling to 3 teams in the NFL right now. Because they can't have any branding on their tape. We have a white tape now that's just because of that we sell to the 3 NFL teams. So that white tape is doing real well. People will come to me and go, "Hey, this white tape's better than War Tape." And then I got to remind them again, it's War Tape. It just doesn't have the branding on there. So yeah, we're trying to do that because like anything else, we were the first branded tape, and now you see all kinds of different tapes. Everybody wants to have their own tape. But what they don't realize is what kind of tape are you making and how much are you investing on it? And you can make a good round, but to be consistent, we've been around for 14 years. We've built a brand. A lot of the trainers will say, "Yeah, Mike, I like how the tape looks, but that's not why we use it." When after the fight, the wrap that they did, the trainers, their hands will look the same. There's no deviation from how the hand was originally wrapped. When you look at trainers like Robert Garcia and Freddie Roach and Ronnie Shields and, Stephen Edwards and Kevin Cunningham and Ari Sosa and Ismail Salas. And and then you look at the cut man like Mike Basil and, guys like Aaron Navarro. And you just look at all, it's easier for me to name the people that don't use it. And I'm very, very proud of that. And I always wish people luck. We've had people say, "Oh, we're going to start our own tape." I'm not a hater like that. I know what our product is. I know what it stands for. And I know that it's stood the test of time. And so if somebody else wants to venture off, because, it's human nature. You know, when Coca-Cola came out, there was no Pepsi, there was no Sprite. You know, everybody wants to do their own thing, and I applaud that. It's just it's not an easy business, and we've been lucky enough to build good partnerships with really good people for a long time. And you know, when I look at Robert Garcia and Wildcard Gym, two of the most prominent gyms in the world, and all their fighters, you know, wear war tape. And I mean, that's a testament to the hard work that we've done and the trust that they have in us, and to be at a high level when you see, you know, your tape, you know, worn by the best fighters in the world.
Over the 14 years of war tape since you started it, what's been the most significant piece of feedback that you've gotten from a fighter, from a trainer, that you've adapted to the actual product?
When Freddie Roach first started using it, he was our first big time trainer. So I just want to let you know that, hey, I like how it looks, but I like how it wraps. It's the same with Robert Garcia. I mean, Robert is just the hottest trainer in the world right now. He's hotter than fish grease, and it's not because. And it's because of his hard work, you know, and the team and the people that he has around him, including his son and everybody at the Robert Garcia Boxing Academy, and the number of fighters that he worked with. They trust it. When you can trust something and take something to the bank, that means it's reliable. And what is a fighter's biggest assets? His hands. And what better to protect it than having a product that they can count on? And that's the biggest compliment that we can get.
Who was you said Freddie Roach was like your first, you know, big, I guess, personality in the sport to really use it for his fighters. But who was the first fighter with like the biggest profile to use it when you and your team first saw it and were like, oh, okay, we're there?
I think it's not really one fighter, because the fighters come and go. It's the trainers that have the fighters that keep cycling through. So even though, like, you know, Manny Pacquiao wore it. Most of your UFC champions over the years have used it. You know, when you think of like the Ronda Rouseys, and John Jones still uses it. And I mean, there's just so many UFC fighters and MMA fighters that use our product as well. It's not just for boxing, that we have NFL teams now wearing it. I think it's a accumulation. It's not just one particular fighter, because, you know, a fight event comes and goes. Canelo Alvarez, before, you know, his trainer opted not to use it anymore, and I have my reasons, I think, why, used it for years. But when Bivol beat Canelo, just coincidentally, and I was Bivol's cutman, and I think I was super excited in the corner when Bivol beat Canelo. I think I can't rule out that might be the reason why they stopped using it. And it's human nature. I get it. And they work at a top level, and they're very competent people. They have a world championship pedigree, and they can do that. But it was just kind of a coincidence. And as a homicide detective, I don't really believe in coincidences. I deal with facts, you know.
So you don't think the Canelo actually had a problem with the actual product of war tape? It was just more like, maybe this guy's too happy in the corner.
I have my suspicions.
Right.
Using a different tape now, but you know, we have 1 million pictures that have gone viral with Canelo wearing war tape, and I wish them the best. You know, hey, it's like anything else, man. Some guy used to drink Pepsi, and, you know, now he drinks Coke. I get it. People change, but when you look at the people that have stayed the test of time, the Freddie Roaches and the Ronnie Shields and the Kevin Cunninghams and the Robert Garcias and the Ismael Salases. I mean, there's Bob Santos, you know, who was trainer of the year. And you look at these guys that use our tape, and like I said, I'm leaving a bunch of people out. And I should, you know, a lot of world champions: Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez, all those young guns, Oshaki Foster. I mean, these guys are all war tape guys, you know.
Is there a moment when you're growing up, you know, watching the fights and watching the sport and the fighters and all that, where it kind of sticks in your brain about a moment where there was a cut, or you knew like it was the job of a cut man, like whoever the cut man was at that time, where you looked and you're like, hey, I wish that was me?
No, I never, ever, and this is the honest to God's truth.
Really?
about 16 years ago, I never paid one bit of attention to what a cut man did. No. I was driving home for some fights in Fresno with David Martinez, who was a very good cut man, who had worked Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto. And he happened to need a ride back from the fights from LA, from Fresno. And I started asking him questions. And then I started going to talk to Joe, legendary cut man Joe Chavez in East LA. And then I started just working with some lower level guys. I was still training guys at the time and doing some MMA fights. And then I decided, you know what, because of my regular job as a homicide detective, I can't be in the gym every day with these fighters. How else can I try to make an impact and try to have a career in boxing? And then once I got going on it, man, I just went full steam ahead. But to be honest, I never once paid attention, other than I was just as naive about a cut man, just like most people are when Rocky fought and he said, "Cut me, Mick." Yeah. Which cutting the guy is not exactly what you do. But yeah, it's been it's been an interesting journey, because I wasn't able to make my mark as a fighter like I had dreamed about. But I'm being able to make my mark doing something else and attached to the sport at a high level.
Is there a fighter, not even a moment, but a fighter, or even like you being a fan growing up, that you like, man, like because you've been a cut man for last 15 or so years, right. But like, is there a fighter from when you were growing up, like, man, if I wish he was fighting in this modern era and I would have had a chance to be his cut man?
That would be Roberto Duran. That would have been fighters like Roberto Duran, Wilfred Benitez, Alexis Arguello, Pepino Cuevas, Larry Holmes, fighters like that I was just, huge fans of. There were so many fighters I was fans of. Bobby Chacon. I mean, there were just so many fighters that gave so much. That gave so much to the sport, and that's why I respect the sport so much, and that's why I wish we would get back to that. Only because I think the fans are missing out. That most guys fight on social media now rather than in the ring.
Yeah, I can see that. I could definitely see that. Going back to Virgil, he had a hard-fought win recently. I mean, what'd you think about it?
You know what? He really showed his boxing excellence, his boxing pedigree. He shows that he has a high boxing IQ. He's not just a guy that's going to steamroll guys. Because when you get up to the top level, you're not really knocking a lot of guys out. Very rarely do you see a guy like Crawford knock out a top guy like Errol Spence in the way that he did. Even Canelo and all of his fights, a lot of these fights are going the distance, against people, because, the guys just aren't pulling their panties down and laying down. There's a high level of these guys are high level guys. So I think he really showed his boxing ability, that he's not just a knockout guy. If he hits you just right, yeah, of course. And Madurov's a great fighter. Credit to him and his trainer Joel Diaz. I mean, they're top notch, the top notch team. And you saw what Madurov did against Crawford. So I just think Virgil's going to take some time to rest, and his team. He's got a great machine team behind him, and they're going to make the right decisions. And I just like getting that call when they tell me, "Hey, Mike, get ready. Save the date, because we're going to go on this date." And I leave all that other stuff to them, because they know what they're doing. Just like they don't tell me how to work the cuts, I don't tell them how to match make.
And Virgil, at least from what he's been doing okay. I mean, obviously he's fighting, but a couple of years back he did have the health issues that caused a little bit of delay in his fighter career. From your perspective, he's doing way better than that. He's doing okay.
Yeah, he's doing awesome. I have a chance to get out with him in camp a couple of times when he's with Robert Garcia, out there with him and his dad and Hector Beltran and Robert. He's doing fantastic. He does everything. He does everything the right way, and you're starting to see that success. Yeah, did it derail a little bit and slow down the progress? Absolutely, but and in the end, your health comes first. I mean, your health comes first. You don't have anything, man. You don't have anything unless you have your health. It's just, I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how much talent you have. I don't care where you're at in life. If you do not have your health, then you're not going to have much else after that.
You're still working in as a detective, right?
Yeah, Halley County Sheriff's 21 years I've been there. I've been on the Sheriff's Department for 38. I could have retired now 5 years ago. I
Is this the
supervised.
year?
Huh?
Is this the year?
I say that every year, but I supervise the missing persons unit at Homicide, and I run all the homicide training for the whole state. I do 6 2-week homicide schools, which I love doing. There's nothing really pushing me out the door. I can work at my own pace. I'm kind of my own boss of my own unit. And missing people have been kind of a new kind of passion for me, because there's a lot of times they do correlate to homicides, and having the best investigators that work for me, being able to to look at these things in real time is very fascinating and rewarding when you can find somebody. Like I said, we can't change what happened, but we can be there to make sure that if something bad happened to somebody, that they are held accountable. And so there's nothing pushing me out the door, but I'm probably going to go one more year. But you know what, man, I've been saying that for 5 years. I'm blessed. I get to do things that I love at a high level. I get to be around good people at work, good people in the fight game. My younger son works with me with War Tape. My older son, Andrew, who's a very quality world-class cutman now, who's worked with several world champions. Like I said, he's going to be Stan Jonas' cutman against Boots Ennis with Marvin Zamudio. Marvin's a top trainer. He's been under the guidance of Freddie for years. He's got his own stable of guys now at Wild Card, and I love it because Marvin and Andrew have become quite a team. And I always tell them they got a lot of years left. So I mean, what's better than doing what you love most? What's better than doing what you love with the ones you love most? And I'm very blessed in that regard, and I don't take anything for granted.
What have you had any people who work for you, whether it's investigators or other police officers or sheriff's deputies, who obviously a lot of them know what you do on outside of police work. They ask like, "Hey man, like that's very like, can I co-shadow you? Can I learn how to do this?"
I get that all the time. Like, hey, let me be your assistant and all that stuff. Like just like the same thing when people think they can be homicide detectives because they watch Dateline. I want to be a homicide detective, but I don't want to be a cop. It's kind of like you want to be a brain surgeon, but you don't want to be a doctor. I just say, look, man, we're not the Christmas help. They don't just hire us from November to January.
Let's just say hypothetically, next year is the year. You get to next year, and you're just like, you know what? I think it's time. Hang up my spurs. Besides that famous case that was referenced on Dateline, I believe the Lomita Black Widow case that you were a part of, is there any other case that will stick with you post-retirement?
Yeah, I worked a couple of Mexican mafia cases. I was one of the investigators that assisted on the Suge Knight case. I wasn't the lead investigator, but I was one of the investigators on the case. Working multiple fatal officer-involved shootings that maybe national media didn't hear about. And just the I hate to use the word everyday run-of-the-mill homicides, but ones that affect the community that maybe didn't get all the high-profile news stuff that you take satisfaction if you're able to bring people to justice. And you know what? There are cases that unfortunately I haven't solved or haven't been able to have enough evidence to bring somebody, to formal charges that kind of gnaw at me. So those are things that are always in the, in the back of my mind. But I've loved my career. I love the people that I've been around. I just think right now I'm in a position where I'm able to do the things that I love because I want to do them. There's nothing I have to do. There's nobody making me do anything. Yeah, was a trip to Saudi Arabia long? Yeah. But is Virgil Ortiz and his dad and Robert Garcia and our entire team and Hector Beltran, is he worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a choice that, it's a rough trip. Don't get me wrong, man. I came back. You're
a big guy too.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. See, it's the accommodations. I got back. I got sick. I even got a stupid sty in my eye that I hadn't had since I was like 10. And then I had to go to Brooklyn for the PBC fights on the tank card for J-Rock. He was the opening fight on the pay-per-view. So I wasn't feeling good at all. But I wasn't going to let Virgil down. I wasn't going to let Julian down. I started this thing with him. And if it is the end, then I ended it with him,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you've said in other interviews that I've seen in the past that at times boxing has kept you sane from your everyday job as a detective. There's been moments like that. Is that true? And how does that work for you?
Yeah, because I'm able to actually help somebody. As a homicide detective, by the time I come out there, whatever's happened's already happened. Inside that ring, inside that 1 minute in between rounds, what I do can help their career and help them health and safety wise. And there's a parallel there, and there's a satisfaction that comes with that, to knowing whatever you do in life, that if you do it, if it's a job well done, you can take satisfaction in that, and I do that.
Have you ever been recognized? I mean, even though, like you said, you're dealing with a very serious subject matter, but have you ever been recognized by, victims or people associated with any crimes that you've investigated?
Yeah, absolutely. During COVID, I thought I was going to get killed ordering a burger because these guys came in with red rags over their face. I thought they were going to rob the place. They had red bandanas on because that was their COVID mask, quote unquote. And as it turned out, one of the guys, I had put his brother in prison. So I'm thinking, man, I ran down to the burger place during COVID. It was one of the only places that was open to go pick up food. And I had no gun and I had no nothing. And I couldn't tell who the guy was because the red bandana was pulled up to above his eyes. And they said my name. And he kind of stood up aggressively. And I stood up aggressively. And then he's like, "Hey, Rodriguez, I see you working the fights all the time." And then I realized who it was. And there was no confrontation. But, I couldn't show weakness during that time, even though, it could have went all bad. But it's happened. I think the most satisfying thing is I go to the grocery store sometimes after a big fight and people were like, "Hey, weren't you in the corner of that boxing fight?" And that happened for about 2 or 3 weeks after Katie Taylor fought Amanda Serrano, because I work with Katie Taylor, and that's just an unbelievable experience that I got to mention because their third fight's coming up. So many people watch that on Netflix, like 78 million. The people at the gym, people at the market were recognizing me like, "Hey, aren't you that guy?" And I was like, "That's my twin brother," or whatever. But and now they're going to fight again, I think July 11th. And then I already got the call from her management, and, I'm saving that date, Madison Square Garden, for the third fight. And Amanda's such an incredible champion, incredible competitor. And, those two, her and Katie Taylor, were made for each other.
So you're already locked in for that date on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm already locked in for that date, and I can't wait. I got Erickson Lubin coming up in a world title eliminator coming up in May. I'll probably be the fourth guy, the assistant in the corner with Stan Jonas against Boots Ennis. So a nice little break is coming up, and I enjoy it. I'm going to go to see a comedy club here, and as soon as I'm off the phone with you, I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to go to a comedy club to see the comedian Willie Brisena. I don't know if you've ever seen him.
Oh, he's funny, man. He's funny.
He is.
Yeah.
Him, and I see him on Instagram, and every time I see where he's going to be at, a lot of the times it's not the times that he's local because he travels a lot. I'm usually not here. I'm working fights, so I got tickets, and I'm going to head over there. And as soon as I'm off the phone with you, I'm going to do my Superman imitation and change and get over there.
Well, let's end on this, since you're going to go to a comedy show to see Willie Brisena in Los Angeles. I don't know if you've been asked this before. I'm sure you have, but who would you want to play yourself in a Hollywood movie? Well, and let me add to that. And is there a specific scene from your life, whether it's in boxing, police work, personal life, or all three, that you would specifically want to be included in an adaptation of your life?
Yeah, I always get my personality, my sense of humor, and my size. People would, a lot of times from the side, they would think I was Vince Vaughn. And somebody told me when Vince Vaughn first started out 30 years ago, "Hey, you guys resemble each other." And so I think he would probably be the one to probably play me if there was in any movie. And then Cutman Mike Basil, the mechanic that works on ESPN, the Cutman. There was a picture that we took, and somebody put the Wedding Crashers, that I was Vince Vaughn and he was Owen Wilson. So we're like the Wedding Crashers, and we always joke about that. So it's just kind of like, the parallels. And Vince Vaughn's actually a big boxing fan. He used to come out to some fights. And so I always, because of that comparison, and people used to come up to me and go, "Oh, you look like Vince, you're like the Mexican Vince Vaughn," or whatever. So I think that I don't know if that answers your question, but that would kind of be it would be the wedding crashers, you know, because they had fun going to a lot of weddings, you know.
What about, is there any specific scene or moment from your life that you would want to have included absolutely in a movie about yourself?
No, I don't really think about it in those terms. You know, I just remember being on the apron when the first time I worked with Manny Pacquiao at the MGM. I was standing there with Freddie Roach, and one of the boxing journalists took a video, and they show me and Freddie Roach, my back and Manny Pacquiao during the national anthem. And I remember being there and being able to, somebody captured that and being able to see it because I'm there on the apron. And I'd already worked with some world champions, you know. This was Manny Pacquiao, and he was like on a completely different level. And I remember standing there, they're singing the national anthem, and I'm on the apron. And I'm standing next to Freddie Roach. And they're going to get, and the national anthem's going to end. They're going to introduce Manny. And right before the national anthem gets done, you start hearing the crowd, Manny, Manny, Manny. And I'm thinking to myself, I literally thought back to when I was an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, and I, you know, used to hit the heavy bag in my garage. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm here. It almost felt like I was getting ready to fight and get introduced. That was just kind of my moment. If I have had a moment, it was that moment.
Yeah. You saying that, I was thinking about it. I was like, you're painting the picture. Yeah, I can see how that was very significant for you with somebody else.
That moment, somebody actually filmed it from ringside, and they sent it to me. And it was just very ironic that at the same moment I was having that moment, somebody actually captured it.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, you know, you've been on multiple times, and I'm sure you're going to be on multiple times again. But I want to be respectful of your time to let you go enjoy your free time, your limited free time, because I know you're a busy guy, especially with your detective job, and then, you know, your weekends are usually busy with fighters as a cutman. So I want to be respectful of your time. But before we finish up here, go ahead and let people know what you have going for you, what you have upcoming, and where they can keep up with you.
Yeah, obviously on TikTok, I do some homicide videos too. It's more about a lot of my homicide crime scene stuff. And then obviously on IG and Twitter, it's kind of all the same. It's Boxer Rods, BOXERRODZ as in zebra. I always like to engage, you know, whether it be homicide. One of my videos got over 1 million views for my homicide stuff. I sometimes show these training videos where I have like a dummy that's lying down, and TikTok's like, you can't show that violent stuff. And I have to let them know that this is a training video. It's not real. So I get a lot of interaction there. And then, you know, just the fights that I mentioned coming up, I actually have a free weekend from work and fights. So it's going to get some workouts in, and it's all good, man. I appreciate you guys, you know, always. I know your partner couldn't be here tonight, but I always appreciate, and I listen to your guys' show all the time. I like what you guys do. So anytime you guys ever ask me to come on, my answer is always going to be yes.
We appreciate that, man. We're definitely grateful to you and your time. And, you know, I'm sure we'll see you at the fight soon. You know, it's been a while, I think, since we've seen you. I think Mike's probably seen you at some of the fights recently, but I haven't seen you in a while. So I'm sure I'll get to seeing you pretty soon, right?
Absolutely, man. We'll have a great weekend, and we'll chat soon.
You got it, man. I appreciate it. And you can follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. For our guest of the week and cutman and homicide detective Mike Rodriguez, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.